Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Friday's U3A show. My name's John Bristow, and it's my pleasure today to introduce Evan Shaw, another geologist, to talk to you on Pakistan and its geology and his experiences there. By way of quick background, Evan is a geologist. He was trained at Rhodes University, did a BSc in geology. He then moved to the PPC group, Pretoria Portland Cement, which for many years was South Africa's largest cement producer. So he ended up spending about 36 years there as the assistant geologist and then manager group mining services. And left in 2005 and did 6 years with a consulting group called Sephaku Cement. Sephaku built South Africa's newest and most modern cement factory up near Lichtenburg in the northwest. A fascinating project. That the cement factory was built by the Chinese under budget, in time. And Dangote, who's Africa's wealthiest black businessman industrialist, is a major shareholder in that company. And then, interestingly, in 2013, Evan was asked to go and do a feasibility study for building a potential cement plant in Pakistan. And there he worked for Asia Premier Cement. And he's going to talk to us about that experience today. And then in 2016, Evan retired to Stanford. So he's here close to us, and we welcome him today. And thanks, Evan, for making yourself available. And we really look forward to this presentation.
Good morning, gentlemen and ladies. And thanks, John, for the introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about Pakistan today. I think I'll spend more time talking about the people than really talking about geology, because that was the interesting part of this whole thing. But we'll start off this by trying to answer the question as to why the heck it was Pakistan that I went to. And then I'll talk to you a little bit about the geological reconnaissance work that we did there, and also how we established the project and the raw material evaluation that we had to do. And then I will spend more time talking a bit about Pakistan in general, because I found Pakistan absolutely fascinating. We were just talking a little bit earlier this morning about your impression of any country is based on what you see in the news or see on the TV. Very honestly, I'll tell you, I was very scared of Pakistan. So you get an impression based very much on news. And news, good news, is not good news. Bad news is generally good news for any news reporter. I'll then talk a bit about the feasibility study and where we stand currently with the project. So starting off with why we went to Pakistan. Well, in 2013, the work that I was doing for Sephaku Cement in South Africa came to an end. And Sephaku then became the first new entrant into the South African cement market since 1934. So there'd been no new entrants until since 1934. And you can see possibly somewhere why the plant that we built cost 5 billion rand. So it's not a very cheap industry to get into in South Africa. Then also in 2013, there was big rumors that Pakistan and China were busy negotiating what was called an economic corridor through the country. And because of this rumor and the anticipation of this potentially economic upturn for Pakistan, one of the previous sponsors that I had asked me to go to Pakistan to do a feasibility study for putting up a new cement plant to take the benefit of the upturn that was predicted. Well, eventually in April 2015, China and Pakistan announced they had signed an agreement to construct an economic corridor straight through Pakistan, and that would link China and Pakistan. And they then said the projected cost of that was $46 billion US. So something that we were really looking forward to, trying to get a slice of that expenditure. The project was then named the CPEC, which is China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And I'll talk a little bit about that. First of all, the idea was to start in the bottom here, and it's a port on the Arabian Sea known as Gwadar. and then to construct a rail, road, pipeline, all sorts of contacts through the center of Pakistan into a place called Kashgar in China. Now, you'll notice one of the things here is that this whole corridor goes through Pakistan and then goes through this gray area, which is called Kashmir. You're probably aware of that. The total distance of this route is 2,700 kilometers. Now, I'm mentioning Kashmir because if you've ever heard of Kashmir, you'll know that it's an area with a lot of unrest and a lot of disagreement as to who controls it. So I'll talk a bit more about that a bit later on. Now, this whole CPEC, the advantage obviously for Pakistan was that it would be the economic activity all along this corridor. They were going to build hydro schemes and all sorts of things. So for Pakistan, it made a lot of sense. And then the advantage for China was that it would give China a link to a warm water port of Gwadar in southern Pakistan. And this new route, and I'll show you on a map just now, it was going to shorten, or is going to shorten, the current sea route from the Middle East to China by a huge amount. Now, over here, we've got a Middle East area, and at the bottom of Pakistan, we've got Gwadar, which is the port, which is leased. We'll talk about that. And the route through Pakistan into Kashgar, obviously a lot shorter than this sea route, which goes through here, the Straits of Malacca, which was always a problem, past Singapore, strategically a problem, and then all the way around to Beijing up this way. So huge advantages foreseen for China. The port of Gwadar is quite an interesting place. It's on the Arabian Sea. And as you can see from the left picture here, it's a little island with a bit of a nice spur or tombolo linking it here. It's a deep water port, and on the bottom picture you can see the Chinese have already spent a fair amount of money on it. Now, Gwadar has been leased by Pakistan to China for a period of 40 years, and they are proposing in Gwadar a free trade zone, something like Singapore or Hong Kong, and they all already christening it as the new Dubai. The reason that it's important is it's very strategic, and it is a deep water port. The bottom here, you can see a lot of the planning that's gone into it. So a very exciting project for those two countries. The corridor going through was also then somehow dubbed a bit the corridor of opportunity. And you can see on these things, a lot of activity along it. As I said, hydroelectric schemes, pipelines, the roads, rail, all sorts of things started linking onto this project. So with all this in mind, in August 2013, I then undertook my very first trip to Pakistan. And the objective of this trip was to, firstly, to locate suitable raw materials for cement. Now, cement manufacture requires mainly limestone, really about 70%, but it also requires a certain amount of iron ore. It requires some of the alumina products. It requires gypsum. So the objective was to try and locate those somewhere close to this economic corridor to take advantage of it, and then to apply for an exploration or a mining right over that area. Now, Pakistan, when we got back, when we looked at it, we just decided that the most suitable area from literature was what was known as the Salt Range. It's an area that sits between Islamabad, which is the capital, up here, and Lahore down here. And it would be fairly close to the route traveling through Pakistan. So we then selected that as the prime area to concentrate on. The main reason for that was geologically, we were looking at two limestone zones known as the Sakazar Formation and the Namel Formation. Now, these limestone formations are all part of the Charat group, and the interesting thing for us, or the geologists, was that this is a very, very young formation. Young, when I say young, I mean between 47 and 56 million years. We say that's young because if we're looking at limestone or for cement in South Africa, we're looking probably at stuff called the Malmani Formation over here, which is 2.5 billion years old. And so 56 in our terms, is very, very young material. The salt range itself is a range of hills running along east to west, and it sits between two major rivers, the Indus River and the Jhelum River on the other side. It is quite an elevated area, and if you see it over here, it's this whitish or the yellowish area here, sitting between all these rivers. Now, you'll see in actual fact that there are 5 rivers, and 5 rivers in Pakistani is Punjab, or in India is Punjab. So that is the Punjab zone, meaning 5 rivers. So the area we were interested in was right in the center here. Geologically, it was a bit complex, and that was due to the motion of this Indian plate into the Eurasian plate. So the tectonics of this area became quite complex, as we were going to sit right on the transition between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate that had now created all these mountains in Asia. The area we chosen sits right over here on the Makan subduction zone. So we were already expecting to find a lot of, or experience a lot of problems in terms of earthquakes, etc. So the zoning we're looking at here, right between Islamabad and Lahore. My first trip then to Islamabad, I flew through Dubai and landed in Islamabad. And I was really very pleasantly surprised. I had no real idea what Islamabad would be like. And when I landed, I found myself in a very, very modern city, contrary to what I expected. If you look on the very left-hand slide, you'll see the plan layout of the city. It was built in 1967 as a purpose-built capital. And you'll see on this plan, everything's in blocks and squares and straight lines. So it's very easy to find your way around in Islamabad. Somebody's address will be B37, that type of thing. So it's all on a grid reference, very, very easy to move around. On this center picture here, you'll see that straight line through the center. That's the whole rail line connection. So it's a very, very simple and organized city. If you look down the bottom, you'll see, again, pretty modern. Modern infrastructure, a very, very good city. My first night, I spent in this hotel, 5-star, not bad. Accommodation, very good. If you look on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a nice little bar, fridge, or a pub. And I was expecting to open that and get something to drink. And what I found in there was some cool drinks. So that was my first introduction to something in Pakistan. But room and accommodation, very good. And I had the idea that this was going to be the type of accommodation that I was going to have to live with in Pakistan. On the next night, we went into the country, and I found that, no, this was a little bit different. Yeah, we ended up staying in stuff which really was not a good advert for cement at all. Half of the pillars were collapsing, falling down. And interestingly, they had no kitchen in this place at all. And all the cooking was done on an open stove outside with some charcoal. We then contacted the Department of Minerals, and our first trip into the area, into the mountains, was with the regional director and his team. It appears to be a common thing that in Pakistan, when you go out, you take your whole team with you. And this regional director took his geologists, his surveyor, his draftsman, his secretary, any single body in that office all came out on this trip, all to watch one guy doing some work. So out to the salt range we went, and it was the first time that we came across security issues in Pakistan, because we had this vehicle traveling with us full of security guys. Now, my first impression was that I was a little bit concerned that this vehicle wouldn't make it where we were trying to travel. My second concern was that if anybody tried to kidnap us, I wasn't quite sure what the security guys were going to do about it, because they were all about my age. But we got used to it immediately, and found that wherever we went, whatever we did, you had a security guy just on your shoulder. Reason being that Pakistan is obviously very, very aware of the security situation inland. The main concern, I think, has been kidnapping of foreign nationals. So wherever we went, and I'll go through it later, we were followed very closely by security. The Salt Range is really a beautiful area, stunning area, and not that populated. And it is probably very similar to South Africa's Mpumalanga area, mountainous and very beautiful, a lot of irrigation around the area. Geologically, it is quite stunning because of all the folding, faulting, and thrusting that goes on. What makes it even more interesting geologically is that it's a young thing, so lots of fossils and stuff like that. So pretty much a geologist paradise to work in this area. The first thing I had to get used to here is that in South Africa, the limestone that we have, and I must here say that limestones in South Africa for cement are really poor. We deal with very, very poor materials. Here we had completely the opposite. In South Africa, our limestones tend to be very softest material compared to the other rock. So we would always look for limestones in valleys or low-lying areas. Here in this part of the world, the limestone is harder than anything else, so it forms the hills. So I had to get my mind reset and look up instead of looking down. But these are all the limestones, and really, really stunning material we would die for in South Africa. All over the area we drove, there were these cliffs, all of very, very good pure limestone, made us really, our mouths water. Roads, very, very narrow, nice, but stunning beauty, absolutely beautiful area to work in. One of the things we noticed pretty straight away was that the material was young and fully full of stuff called chert. Now, chert is a very fine grained silica, and it's something that if you do drilling, or particularly diamond drilling, it's something that diamond drillers actually hate. And we immediately saw that this was not going to be a good area for diamond drilling. Look at the establishment of the project then. When we got back, we realized that Pakistan is and was a country with a pretty corrupt administration, which is, I think, something we probably quite used to. But we had to take this into account to develop the project. And we then went about it by appointing a CEO, and he was a friend of the Prime Minister for obvious reasons. The Prime Minister's name was Nawaz Sharif. So we managed to get a friend of his, and we appointed him as a CEO. We also appointed a country manager. We managed to get hold of the retired Minister of Mines so that we had good contacts with the department, and we appointed him as the country manager. And we then applied for the mining lease. Well, because of our contacts, it was applied and was granted very quickly. On the 13th of March, we got a whole 900 hectares granted as a mining lease area. We then had to go ahead and appoint the rest of it, exploration team, geologists, etc. Now, our idea was that we would send one geologist from South Africa, besides myself, and then we would take on probably one Pakistani guy as a geologist to help us out. But when we advertised, we were absolutely inundated by guys with very, very high qualifications at all universities dying for a job, simply because there is so little going on in Pakistan in terms of exploration. We were totally inundated with these guys. A lot of them had gone to university and couldn't find jobs and simply continued getting more and more degrees. So we eventually settled on taking 4 guys instead of the 1. And all of these guys, much, much higher qualifications than I ever could imagine. We then went about trying to get our labor and other guys together, and I'll talk a little bit later about the drilling, but on this photograph, we've got the 3 guys 2 guys in the center here are the drilling guy, This was a guy we took with in the bottom here. He was our health and safety, and our other one geologist on the right-hand side. The rest of the guys were Pakistani guys, basically all the laborers. Now, this guy on the left here just happened to be a qualified mining engineer. Because he'd never worked, he was quite happy to take a job as a laborer, simply to be able to put his name down as having had some experience. The same with most of these other guys. They were all in their late 20s and 30s. A lot of them had actually never had a job, a fixed job before. So people were absolutely crazy about getting jobs. We had to turn away hundreds and hundreds to select these guys. Then we got to the next point, which was trying to survey the leased area. And we discovered that because of security, no aerial survey was permitted in Pakistan. So we had to go back to the old systems on the ground and survey the leased area manually. We then got to appointing a drill contractor, and we knew that diamond drilling was going to be a problem, but there was absolutely no reverse circulation drilling in Pakistan available. So we decided to try the diamond drill. We did try it, and you can see on the box on the right, that box should have been full of core, and it was not even half. So we were getting 30 to 40% recovery. Now, in the cement industry, because we use all the material, we have to get 100% or closest, damn it, to 100% recovery. So this was just not acceptable. We then hunted everywhere for a reverse circulation rig, which is normally what we use, and we could not find one anywhere close by. We eventually ended up returning to South Africa and getting our drilling guys here to build a rig, and we had to ship this rig all the way across to Pakistan, and again, naturally trying to get this through the border, trying to get it through customs. We had to make use of all our contacts with the government. But eventually we managed to get this rig through as a reverse circulation rig. We then looked at appointing a ISO accredited laboratory and discovered that there were none that we could use for our chemical analysis. We were looking at doing something like 7,500 samples. So we then again had to turn to South Africa, appointed a laboratory, and we had to decide to fly all our samples out to South Africa. With all these problems, we eventually only got to start our exploration on 20th of March 2015. All right, we'll look at the exploration and the raw materials. First of all, we had to find some accommodation. We were quite lucky. We found this little hotel with a real nice name called the Grand Imperial Hotel. I'll talk a little bit about British names later on, because British names are very important. This was a Grand Imperial Hotel, which was in the countryside, about 15 k's from where we wanted to work. So we took this place over for 2 years. It had about 10, 12 rooms. And what we did was on the bottom floor, we appointed a security company to look after us, and they occupied the bottom. So we occupied the top floor, so we were nice and safe. Nobody could get from the bottom to the top. Security-wise, this is something we really had to get used to. We had security guys following us wherever we went. It's just something that you have to understand in Pakistan and accept. Really, really super guys, but that's the way you have to learn to live. We then purchased our vehicles, and I'll show you. All the vehicles had 4 little seats on the back, and on those seats you had your 4 security guys with their automatic weapons, and you traveled in the vehicle, and we always traveled in convoy with the whole bunch of security sitting on the back. When we used to reach the field work, the guys were dropped off strategically, and they would encircle the entire area in which we were working as protection. In the hotel itself, we eventually kitted ourselves out into having a nice little dining room lounge. We eventually appointed our own cook because we found the food was something we couldn't get used to, and that's particularly the chili side. It's so hot, it's very difficult to eat. So we got our own cook, and we got ourselves sorted out. From a alcohol point of view, I mentioned earlier, and you probably know that Pakistan is a alcohol-free zone. And as you enter the airport, there's a big sign that says the importation of alcohol is illegal. So my first trip, I went there, I was pretty dry. The second trip, I'm a typical South African, so I decided to vat 'n kans. And I took a bottle of whiskey and I stuck it in my suitcase. And when I arrived at the airport, the porter that picked up my suitcase came and told me that the custom guy wanted to see me. So I went along, and the custom guy took one look at me and said, "Is this bottle in the suitcase mine?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, that's fine." And then I suddenly realized that as long as I wasn't Muslim, as long as I was an expat, that was okay. So from then onwards, all the whiskey used to come via me in my suitcase to the little pub that we set up in this hotel. We also took over a little school in this area and set it up as our offices. And we soon learned that a nice way to go out in the evening is to dress in the local style. It's something you've got to also get used to, something very different, but it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of laughs on this. The fieldwork. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are geologists, but I presume most of you know about the JORC code, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but just to mention that because this was an international thing we were busy with, we had to do everything in accordance with this JORC code. And the JORC code is a professional code of practice setting minimum standards for public reporting of minerals and exploration results. So the main reason for this code is to ensure that investors that the results that you're giving them is reliable and accurate, and that is not of salting of the minerals, etc. So this is the code that we worked very strictly to. And some of the measures, for example, that came out was dust sampling, for example. Now, when we were drilling, you can see there's quite a bit of dust that comes out of the cyclone here. So one of the questions were, by losing that dust, did that actually bias our sample that we were getting? So we then had to, with dust collectors, collect all that dust and then have it analyzed and compare it to the other sample. And luckily we found that there was no bias. We were not crushing one material finer than the other. So that was at least that. But those are the type of measures we had to take. We had to also weigh each and every sample, every meter, to check the bulk density of the material. Every 10th meter we drilled, we used to split the sample into two and then submit that to the laboratory as a check sample that they didn't know about, just to make sure that we were getting accurate results from them. And we also used what is known as standard samples. We had to insert 2 of these per borehole at random. We knew exactly what the results of this were, and so we could check to make sure that there was no errors coming through in our chemical analysis. We also had to do the other thing, and that is appoint what is known as a competent person. In this case, we appointed SRK South Africa as our competent, and they then had to visit the site to check to make sure that everything we were doing in terms of exploration met this JORC code. Drilling that we were doing there, it looks nice like a bit of grass that we were on, but this was really a nice grassy area that we worked in. And we used to drill the reverse circulation. The sample was then collected in a cyclone. And as I mentioned, every single meter had to be weighed correctly. It then had to be riffled in the correct way and riffled again. And we then had our geologists, which used to log all the core. And we then split this core down to 2 kilograms of sample. And we then used to keep half the sample and submit the other sample. The way that we did this was via a fly the area out, and we used to DHL this stuff. So each thing was packed and sampled and double checked until eventually we used to put it in the DHL bag and air freight this to South Africa. We, in actual fact, sent something like 15,000 kilograms of sample by air freight to South Africa for chemical analysis. Duplicate samples were all kept on site just for future reference. The work went pretty well. Actually, one of the easiest, nicest jobs I've ever had. We did have a few problems, a bit of rain and a bit of heat, and of course that led to the normal sort of problems that you have in the field, but That is all just to be expected. The drilling we did in different phases. First phase, we drilled fairly far apart, 400 meters by 100 meters, and we did 42 boreholes. And then we did phase 2 on a closer group, 200 by 50, 44 holes. So we did 86 boreholes, all of around about 80 to 90 meters. The reason we don't drill any deeper is that this is going to be a surface mine, and generally we won't mine any deeper than about 80 to 90 meters for practical reasons. The drilling we did, and this is normal for the cement industry, we peppered all this area. You can see the number of holes all concentrated here, all vertical holes peppered in an area on a grid pattern. The section line through that showed us a fairly simple deposit. We were quite interested or amazed by it, not complex at all. All the blue, dark blue are the two zones of the Sakazar and the Namel limestone. All really, really wonderful material by comparison to anything we have in South Africa. Superb. Right, now I want to talk to you a little bit about Pakistan in general. I want to talk a bit about the people. I then want to talk about the roads, transport, etc. And I want to talk a bit about salt mining, because as you saw, we are working along the salt ridge, salt mountains, etc. And I want to talk to you a bit about historical sites. Firstly, the people. You've got to appreciate that the British ruled India, and that of course includes Pakistan, from 1858 to 1947 for 89 years. And the amazing thing that I found there was that the Pakistanis have all preserved British infrastructure. Wherever you go, whether it rail, road, whatever was put in by the British has been kept, is being preserved, and it's been built on. Unlike most of Africa, where anything colonial is not considered good, in Pakistan, they actually really looked after this stuff. The area we were working in, as I said, is called the Punjab, and that's the 5 rivers, and you can see them here, the Jhelum and etc., etc. On the right-hand picture, you can see all the blue. Now, the blue area is the irrigated area of Pakistan. And this area is the largest irrigation system excuse me, in the world. It serves 44.4 million hectares of cultivated land. It's quite incredible. You drive from Islamabad down to Lahore and you drive through absolute gardens. It's really not what I expected in Pakistan. I expected mountains and deserts, and this was something totally different. It's an incredible system of irrigation from those 5 rivers, all put in initially by the British and all looked after and maintained, etc., by the Pakistanis. The rail system, they absolutely look after this like a baby. The rail system is incredible. It works. Same as in India, it works. Everything goes by rail. Pakistanis somehow generally believe that anything British is good. And when we started looking, as we developed the project, at names, etc., we were told, do not think of calling a product, cement product or something, by a Pakistani name. Call it British, because if it's a British name, they believe it's good quality. So anything good quality comes with a British name. So that I found quite interesting as such. The people, now Pakistan is 98% Muslim. It was obviously formed as a Muslim state. The total population is 204 million. Population density is 287 people per square kilometer. We were in an area of very little density, so it just shows you how dense some of the other areas are. India, by comparison, is far more populated. It's got 1.35 billion people in India, and the population is 14% Muslim. So in actual fact, India has got almost as many Muslims as the whole of Pakistan. The population density of Pakistan is 287 per square, and India is 400 per square kilometer. South Africa is 49. We just don't understand population densities here. India I've been to as well, and it's unbelievable for those of you who've been to India. But Pakistan is a lot better. But by comparison to South Africa, it's very hard to understand. On the area that we worked, there were quite a few little coal adits running into the mountains. And we used to pass by these guys, and this was the look you would always get. They were the friendliest, happiest, nicest people I've ever come across. Every time we'd come, they'd want to invite you, come and have a look, come inside. It was such a different thing to what I had expected. People like this with their cows walking around, and as soon as you were there, they would immediately come up to you, want to know who you were, what you were doing, where your family was, everything about you. And very, very often we would get invited to do a very British thing, to take tea. When you went to take tea, this is what you took. It was a lot more than tea. It was a laid on snack, and this was tea time. And it was such a social event with these guys. And of course, in the background, you can see all of our security guys just sitting there. But this is how very often we were entertained when you went somewhere. Come and take tea. Quite amazing. We had a guy with us, he's a Zimbabwean, but a South African and a geologist, and a very big guy. And he found this country amazing because there are very, very few. I think I didn't see another African, a black African face anywhere in Pakistan. Everywhere he went, the people crowded around him, and they all wanted photographs taken with him. And he was as happy as you can believe in Pakistan because he was like an absolute celebrity wherever he went. Bit of a problem, of course, with our security, trying to keep people away from him. But this was an absolute experience for this guy. Also here you'll see a lot of the heritage in some of these little villages. He has a cannon that was donated because of some First World War hero from the village. And they look after it. It's shone, it's cleaned, it's looked after. And just going back to how they revere anything that's a heritage. Wherever we worked, we came across this, which was quite a sad part of it. And of course, the partition of India into India and Pakistan happened in 1947. And wherever we worked, there were obviously areas where the Hindus had lived, and they all had moved away. So we came across a large amount of these Hindu graves all over. And unfortunately, they tended to love the higher ground, which of course meant they had their graves in the limestone area. So it was a bit of a problem in terms of the resource. But in terms of this whole partition, it's reported the deaths were between 80 and 100,000, and 14 million people got displaced. And we kept being reminded of this wherever we went. We would see things that would remind you of this tragedy that had happened. The guys that I worked with there, I very honestly got to say that were the best guys I've ever worked with in my life. They were the most honest, reliable people I've ever dealt with. It's quite incredible because it wasn't my impression of what I was going to get there. These guys, we worked through a period of Ramadan. In the middle of summer, temperatures were in the upper 40s, and it was really, really hot. And the guys are not allowed to drink or eat during daylight hours. So we then sat down with them and said, how can we do this? Because we want to continue working. They then came back with the idea that they would be prepared to start working at first light, which in summer is about 4:30 in the morning. So 4:30 in the morning, they would be at site to work. And we would work all the way through without a break until just after lunchtime, at which time they would then pack up and go home. What we had to do was in the area around us, which was luckily fairly bushy, we would put out strategic containers with water, cold water. And so these guys could go into the bush to relieve themselves and get a drink of water without anybody else noticing it. But we never lost a single hour of work during the whole of Ramadan, which absolutely amazed me. Roads and transport in this area. Some of the roads, certainly the roads that led through the Salt Range down to Lahore, etc., were stunning. They were 3-lane highways going through these mountains, and this is the road section going past where we were. There were various types of transport that you would come across, including this sort of thing of camels. But again, everybody stops and wants to have a chat to you. The other thing that is an interest is that all the transport there is private. So anybody that picked up cement from a plant would come in their own vehicles, and nobody who drove his own vehicle would be seen without having a fully decorated vehicle. You cannot believe the way these guys decorate these things. They must spend a fortune on them. But everything is so decorated, and they are so proud of these vehicles. They are incredible to see, and everybody must spend days and hours and months decorating these vehicles. Even the buses get to a stage where I don't know how the driver manages to see out of these things, but you'll notice right on top of the bus are some seats as well. So as the bus gets full, people eventually find their way up to the top of the bus and sit up there as well. So that's something which was quite interesting to see. I didn't travel in those buses, but I could imagine it'd be quite a crash. The other forms of transport, which was this dangerous thing called the tuk-tuk. Now, these guys managed to get, I don't know how many people into these things. And interesting enough, in Islamabad itself, from the outskirts of Islamabad, all these tuk-tuks are banned. So there's not a single tuk-tuk in Islamabad for obvious reasons. They are absolutely the most dangerous thing you could ever see. Road building was also an interesting thing. We're driving down the road, and here these guys are on the left, and they're busy building this road, which by the time we completed the job was already tarred. But these roads are built and packed by hand. Every stone is packed by hand and chipped by hand. So it's quite something to come across. But end of the day, as I said, this road was tarred. Salt mining. The area we worked in is known as the Salt Range. So the reason was because of the salt. And the salt was discovered there by Alexander the Great in about 320 BC. And the way it was discovered was Alexander was invading the rest of India and that area. And he camped with all of these troops in this area. And they woke up to find all their horses licking the rock. Couldn't understand why until they realized that all the rock around them was in actual fact salt. So hence the name of the Salt Range. Salt during the British period was also a problem because the British realized that this was quite a great big export potential. So they brought out the Salt Act prohibiting Indians, including Pakistan, from collecting or selling salt. This was quite a harsh thing. Now, if you ever watched any of Gandhi's movies, you'll know the story about how they fought against the Salt Act. But so a huge amount of salt, nobody there was allowed to use it. We went through to the Khewra salt mine on one Saturday as a bit of an excursion. Now, this was opened in 1872, and it's the second largest salt mine in the world. It has a reserve of about 6.6 billion tons, and they produce about 1,500 tons per day. All of the production is by hand. It has become quite a tourist attraction because you can go and walk in, and there's temples inside and all sorts of salt articles that they make and sell. So we decided on a off Saturday, or sorry, I think it was a Sunday, I apologize, an off Sunday to go and have a visit. So we hopped in our two buckies with all our security guards, and we set off to this mine, which was about an hour's drive away. By the time we went through the first little village, the police there started chatting to our security, and I suppose the police didn't have anything to do, but they decided that they would escort us as well. So now we had a police vehicle in the front, a police vehicle back, and our two vehicles with all our security guards in the middle. Police vehicle in front had siren blaring, and off they went. Every little village we got to, the police would go screaming ahead, and at every intersection stop all the traffic so we could go with sirens blaring through these little villages. Absolutely embarrassing. I can see how our parliamentary guys travel, but it was really quite an embarrassment. We arrived at the salt mine which I said is a bit of a tourist attraction. And a whole lot of school kids, a school class came out with their teacher. And here we arrived with sirens blaring, whatever. And our big black geologist got out. And I don't know what the teacher thought, but he obviously thought this is a very important delegation. So they all wanted their photographs taken of us. They wanted autographs. And of course, our security guys were having a fit. But it was rather an embarrassing occasion. Going through the salt mine, it was fascinating. These tunnels and this salt has got all sorts of colors. It's very solid stuff, beautiful in terms of colors. And this is all the old worked out areas. Now, the picture on the right, you'll see there's a cannon sitting down there. Now, in the old days, they apparently used to shoot this cannon to knock some of the hanging wall down. Hopefully the guys were accurate, but that's the way they used to blast with a cannon, knock some of the walls down. But everything else, as I said, is done by hand. Some of the historic sites around us, right next door to us was the Skatas Raj Hindu temple. Now, of course, being Hindu, it was very important. And after partition, most or almost all of the Hindus were moved out of this area. So here was this thing that was just totally deserted. Absolutely beautiful temple. The lake there apparently has never been dry. It's known as the Ramtir Lake, and it's considered to be part of God Shiva's tears. But really stunning old place. I'm not sure when it was built, but really something else beautiful. So we did visit this a few times, and it was something nice to see. All right, so the feasibility study. In addition to all the geological work we did, we had to obviously continue the feasibility study, which was not only the geology. So we had to complete a market survey. We had to do a complete cement design. We had to complete mining plans with all the rehab, et cetera, We had to do environmental management plan, financial plan, and we managed to finish all of those by the 17th of March, 2017. Right, so the current status of this project. In 2017, the Prime Minister, remember, the guy that we'd backed, we had a friend of his, he's now with Sharif, he was removed from office as a result of the Panama Papers. You probably remember those. So he was implicated and he was removed from office in 2017 at the very wrong time for us. In 2018, he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for what he had done. And Imran Khan became the new Prime Minister of Pakistan. Now, all the agreements that we had were with the old government, and all our environmental reports, etc., were all already submitted. And we then found that all of these had now been cancelled by the new government. And the environmental plan has still not been approved. So we had put all our eggs in a basket by backing certain people, certain governments, and it really has appeared that this has backfired. So it looks as if we had backed the wrong horse on this project. Thank you, guys. That's my story.
What a fantastic story, and thank you for all the details you've given. It's really clear. I've got a million questions, so I'm going to hog this thing for a little while. Did you travel up the famous Karakoram Highway?
No, we did not. We had, unfortunately, quite a restriction on our travel, but we were often offered the trip, a whole series of mountains there, etc., all the highest peaks. We actually never got there, and we were promised, and it was always going to happen. We never got there, unfortunately.
So you didn't see the Khyber Pass either?
No, we never got those highs. I mean, Islamabad is in the foothills of the Himalayas, and unfortunately, we went to work.
Yeah. Now, as far as your drilling is concerned, it appears that you were in fields, but I thought you said that most of the limestone is up in the mountains. Why were you not higher up on the mountains?
Yeah, this was what happened was it was quite a lot of cliffs, and then as soon as you got to the top, you had these flat plateaus, which is where the limestone was actually quite flat on top. So they were really nice, easy areas to work in. So in front of them, you had the cliff, and then you had the flat plateau, and then the next cliff and the flat plateau.
One more question from my side. You mentioned the security personnel that were assigned to you. Do you think they were well enough organized and trained to be able to protect you if you were confronted with some emergency?
The first lot of guys that I went with, I doubt very much. But once we got established there, we had our own company, or we employed a company who were very well organized. It was almost like a military little army. And they used to be there every morning, check us out. And they had to report every single day as to our movements, where we were, what we were doing. So very often when we wanted to just walk out, we were not allowed to. They would always go with us. So they were very well organized.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I can come in there quickly, Evan. I mean, you talked and made the point about the quality of that limestone compared to what we get in this country. How does that impact on actually making the cement? Does that mean you end up with a better quality cement, or is it easier to get to a quality cement?
Okay, right. We're going to manufacture cement, but generally, the higher the quality is not a good thing. You have a specific aim that you go for. Once it gets above that, it starts becoming a problem because as I said now at the talk, the cement industry is one of the greatest contributors of CO2. So the higher the quality, the more CO2 you're going to produce. So one of the problems that we had there was the limestone was very good quality. We had to then spend a lot of time going into other materials. Luckily, in this case, we had the two zones of limestone, and between the two was a beautiful band of shale, clay material, which was very suitable. So when we took the combination of the two, it worked out pretty well.
Okay.
But yes, the answer is that you do not want that higher grade of material. You want a reasonable grade of material. That's a whole combination of the different minerals that make it important.
Evan, what happened to the rest of the project, building the corridor all the way from China to the coast?
Okay, a lot of it is still going now. One of the things that, of course, is happening there is, that India and China never seem to see eye to eye. So India, in the last few years, has spent all of its time trying to stop this project. The main way that they're doing this is trying to stir up in Kashmir, which is, of course, the area that this goes through. Now, Kashmir, of course, I could have talked a lot more about it, is the route now going through Kashmir is quite important because it's going through some of the highest mountains in the Himalayas and all that. And it's a very volatile area because Kashmir is controlled by Pakistan and India, and there's always been a dispute about the border. So, of course, India is happy to fuel because right from the beginning, India stated that they would stop this project going ahead as far as they could because they obviously don't want it. And they do not want China to have a port right down in the Arabian Sea. So India has gone about it as much as they can trying to scarper this project. They've also apparently, even in the southern part, which is quite tribal, the Indians have got in there and tried to stir up all the tribes. So to try and answer your question, quite a lot of work has gone into the harbor, as I've showed you there. A lot of it has gone into the roads and stuff like that has been upgraded, but a lot of it is being held now for two reasons. One is this disruption by India, and the other one obviously is this whole what has happened in COVID now. So it's really come to a bit of a grinding halt at this point in time. I'm guessing that the advantages are so great for China that it will go ahead, but there will still be a lot of problems.
When I traveled to Kashmir a few years ago, it was almost like traveling to a different country. You had to get special permission to fly in there. I wanted to visit that Srinagar and a beautiful lake area, but it was really very well fortified. And from the moment you stepped off the plane, there were security guards and military all around you. You had to go through a special checkpoint just to leave the airport. You had to declare everything you wanted to do. So it was a beautiful area to visit, but it was a strenuous time, I can assure you.
Yeah, it's always a very, very highly contested area that, and as I say, particularly because India wants to keep Pakistan and China as far apart as they can.
Anybody else?
I just want to say, Evan, that was it was so interesting, absolutely fascinating. Thank you very, very much.
You didn't realize that geologists have fun sometimes when they work.
No, you see, life is full of surprises. So thank you for that.
Evan, if I may ask, that's Ben here. How did you manage with the language? Were you able to communicate in the, was it Farsi they speak there, or?
Yeah.
Urdu, I think.
Yeah. The language, of course, it was British, so a lot of the teaching is in English. So when you came across some sort of educated people, they spoke reasonably good English. A lot of other guys spoke English. Well, they said it was English, but you really couldn't understand what they were saying. But I must say, of all the guys that worked for us, all spoke relatively good English. So that was not a problem to us. We did find some other areas we went into where we met people. We couldn't understand what they were saying, but they said they were speaking English.
And Evan, the standard of the geologists, their training, was that good? And I mean, good in theory, just lacking in practice.
Absolutely, John. You know, that's, as I said, that area is a bit of a geologist's paradise. The guys that we had there were incredibly good knowing the structure of that particular area, but none of them had ever actually physically done anything. So it was so exciting for them to actually see something they'd been learning about. And it was like another world for those guys now to actually get into a project, because they'd sat at university, were all very highly intelligent, had done a lot of work, knew this stuff backwards, but in theory. And it was a wonderful thing to actually see these guys seeing stuff that they've been learning about all their lives. They were always so excited to do something. It was wonderful.
Are there mining activities in Pakistan?
Very, very few. Besides the now area, the salt, etc. Then there were a lot of these little adits in our area. There was a very thin coal seam that these guys were all mining by hand. But generally, almost no big projects anywhere. There is quite a bit of oil, but again, it's not a mining thing. But a lot of the guys going to the oil production there. But generally, in terms of our sort of thing of surface mining and exploration, nothing. Now, going back to even the drills, I mean, when we said we use reverse circulation, they hadn't a clue what we were talking about. They'd never even heard of it. So it just shows you the difference. And as I said, all the survey, all the basic stuff that we used to, the guys had never heard of there.
Fascinating. Anybody else?
Yeah, Evan, thanks very much. That was very interesting. I'm just wondering, you probably told us, but I might have missed it. Who were you being protected against? The Indians, the Chinese, the bandits?
I'm actually not sure. All they could tell us was, whatever you do, if somebody comes and chats to you, don't ever say you're an American. so when generally, you know, we always said we are South African, and then of course we got a very good reaction because I think half of their brothers and sisters are all down here. But we were just told, stay away, don't say you're an American, because somehow a lot of them dislike Americans for whatever reason. It may have been due to the past, I don't know. But I think, you know, they're dealing with a lot of the guys. I mean, we're quite close to Afghanistan there. And they obviously dealing with insurgents coming through. And I think, from what I could work out, guys like that, there's not a lot of foreign nationals working around. And I think that was their concern, that somebody from, let's say, Afghanistan could come through and decide that maybe we could extract a few million from somebody. So I think that was generally their concern.
Yeah, and interesting to add to that, Evan. I mean, I did a lot of work in India, and if they heard you were South African and you mentioned Cricket and Jonty Rhodes, then you were made. You know, then you would spend the next hour, you know, and talking cricket, and you'd have friends for life.
Well, I happened to also be there in that little hotel. We had a screen, and it was during the anyway, one of the World Cups. And so, of course, all the guys all wanted to come and watch TV because they don't all have TV. So we used to have the lounge downstairs, and all the guys that worked for us used to come and watch. And the funny part was, we said, what's South Africa's chance? And they all said 0. And they were right.
Yeah.
coming back to Phil's question, of course, there's been a lot of trade between that area and Afghanistan. They've been able to bypass the security restrictions and have smuggled arms into that area for years.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. On the very first trip I did, I had a guy that was I think an engineering guy, also in the cement, that helped me a bit. And when I went back the second time, he'd already accepted a job. He was doing work in Afghanistan on a cement plant. I didn't ask if I could join him, but I would also imagine that even if you went to Afghanistan, you'll probably find that it's so different to what you imagine, that there'll be areas that are perfect.
Anybody else? Johan, I see your hand is up.
Yes, please. Evan, thank you very much. In 2004, I visited the Pakistani Navy. Sorry, my camera switches on and off. And it was fascinating. In the first place, I went to Islamabad, Lahore, and Karachi. And the naval people I associated with could all speak English fluently. And they were all highly technically trained. And it was an interesting visit because I traveled, my wife and my personal staff officer, and we had a security detail ahead of us and astern of us, plus an ambulance following me everywhere I went. And we went up the foothills from Islamabad in the afternoon. We came back at night down a road which was frightening. But these buses all had decorations and they all had reflectors fitted in. And you would travel seeing this massive thing coming at you, flashing lights all over the show. But a very interesting visit. Thanks a lot.
Evan, Admiral Johan Retief is the former head of the South African Navy.
Yeah, well, then he probably knows all about the ports down the bottom.
I only know Karachi. I never visited any of the other ports.
Evan, did you encounter any anti-British sentiments due to the colonial period?
This is the thing I found so interesting, is that there is nothing like that. And I was amazed. I thought they would be very anti-British, but not at all. As I said, it's almost to the opposite. You know, if they buy something, it's always got a British name. It's quite weird. And as I said, we were told, don't try and bypass that, because for some reason, anything British has got a good name. And it was weird. So no, you know, when I spoke to the guys also, even about the whole salt story and the fact that there were a whole lot of forts around the salt mine that stopped them moving salt, I thought they would really be angry about this, but no. It was quite a strange thing. They seem to have got over that and moved forward.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Gert and Evan. I mean, it's the same again in India. I mean, it's like the way they embrace cricket, you know, and that same thing in India. You know, when you go there, if you go there with something British or you refer to something British, and we too, you know, had to go and find drill rigs and that sort of equipment. And the minute you meant, well, we could get it from Britain or maybe South Africa was it's British made, you know, they thought you were the best thing around.
Yeah. That to me, I found interesting. As I said, nothing was destroyed. Everything that was there is.
Yeah, things like the stations and the buildings that they built, you know, the gateway to India, it's all still there and immaculate.
All there. You know, the other things that I found those people so fascinating, because they have very little and they're quite happy to give. And we found occasionally we would be in a guy would pick us up in Islamabad, take us a taxi or something. But of course we had the security. But he would go along in the taxi and he'd stop, and the guy would be selling, you know, those little flower things you put around you. And the guy would stop and he'd buy some of these natural flowers and he'd give them to us. Now, okay, they only cost a couple of cents, but this is a taxi driver. And he just give them to you. You want some money for it? No. He just wants to give you something. And our guys at work, we used to go there some days, and these guys weren't earning much. And they'd come along, and the guy would give you some sweets. You say, no, what for? No, he just wants to give you something. It's quite a strange population.
You spent some time in India too. Can you assess whether the food in Pakistan is very different from the Indian food?
Okay, yeah, it is quite. A lot of the India being Hindu, of course, there was very little beef, although some areas you could get beef. In Pakistan, what we did find is that 90% of the stuff is chicken. I mean, it's chicken, and chicken. And it's all chicken as hot as bloody hell chicken. But what we did find is go to a restaurant and you can find beef, steak, and it is absolutely wonderful beef. So, of course, wherever we went, where we could order, we order steak, and it's half the price of chicken, and it was wonderful steak. So in India, of course, a little bit more difficult. You could get, I think it was buffalo and stuff like that as a beef. But generally, India's food was a little bit more difficult to get the beef side. But the big problem we did have, of course, was the spices. And even the cook we had, he would make some scrambled eggs and we'd say, no chili, no chili. And he'd sneak a little bit of chili in because he could not understand how you would want not to have chili. So we had to beat him now and again to stop this chili that got sneaked into everything we had.
In India, there's a lot of vegetarian food.
Yes, yes.
May I say something?
I did find though that just the difference, sorry Barbara, a difference between India, I just found that in Pakistan, the poverty of India wasn't there. In India, I mean, a lot of places we went to were really poverty. I mean, you haven't seen poverty until you've been up along the Indus and, the rivers there. Yeah, Varanasi was the main thing. I've never seen such poverty. That you did not see in Pakistan. The people were poor, but it was not that absolute deject poverty. And also the populations were not as bad as that. So that was one of the main things I found.
I suppose it was difficult for you in your position to meet women, but you don't mention any women or children. Did you meet any women? Did you see how they lived? How they were treated by the men?
Okay. All right. Another whole talk I can give you. But all right. What we did find, Barbara, is living or going into Islamabad or working where we were in the countryside was really chalk and cheese. If in Islamabad, if you went into one of the shopping centers, it was very much like going into Santon or whatever you wanted to do in South Africa. All the girls, very few of them wore any kit. They all dressed up normally, and you could be anywhere in South Africa for that matter. Very different women would talk to you, etc. When you got out to the countryside, very, very different. All dressed up in burqas, etc. So it was very much a more restricted society in the countryside. What we did find interesting, though, was when we started going around laboratories, trying to find labs that would help us, what we would find is that get to a lab, a laboratory, and the person in charge would always be a male. Almost all the people working there in laboratories were female. Now, it was quite difficult because you had to learn not to touch or approach or shake or whatever, and not even really look at them. And yet these girls were high-powered, they were workers. They were the ones working. So it was quite difficult to understand that. So you had to learn how to approach them and not talk directly to them. So it was quite a little trick of getting around this. But I'm certainly sorry. I think your question is how were they treated? I think they were always treated as subservient, but in the laboratories, except they were the people that did the work. If you wanted to know something, they would send you to some lady who would tell you. The guy at the top hadn't a clue what was going on.
Thank you very much, and also for the very good talk. Thank you.
You're welcome, brother.
Any last questions? Eben, thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. Thank you for the way that you presented it, for the slides. Even the geological part was most interesting. And of course, learning more about the people in the country. Thank you for your time. And thank you too for everybody that participated this morning. I'm going to end the meeting now. Goodbye.